The clatter of plates barely registered as I navigated the dimly lit restaurant, my feet screaming after a 12-hour shift. Luciano's was supposed to be the crown jewel of Little Italy, all dazzling crystal chandeliers and plush crimson velvet upholstery. But after 6 months of serving wealthy patrons who looked right through me instead of at me, the glamour had definitely faded. Table 7 sent back another dish. Marco, the head chef, practically snarled as I approached the kitchen, his face flushed with anger and tiny beads of sweat gathering at his temples. "Third time tonight, Mr. Castellano's gonna pull my spine out through my throat." I glanced towards the corner booth, partially hidden by an ornate privacy screen. Even from this distance, the tension radiating from table 7 felt like static electricity crackling in the air. My colleagues had been avoiding it all evening, suddenly finding urgent tasks whenever Giorgio, the manager, looked for a server for the Castellano party. "What's wrong with the food?" I asked, peering at the barely touched plate of handmade tortellini. Perfect little parcels sitting in a saffron cream sauce that cost more than I made in an hour. Marco threw his hands up in exasperation. "Nothing. It's exactly as specified. But the daughter, she refuses everything. Mr. Castellano is losing patience." "Let me try," I offered, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the sheer desperation in Giorgio's eyes as he approached us. Or maybe I was just too exhausted to recognize danger when it was staring me right in the face. Either way, the words just slipped out before I could think twice. Giorgio froze mid-step. "You, Sofia? You've been here 6 months. This is Antonio Castellano we're talking about." The name should have meant more to me than it did. I'd heard whispers, of course, about how certain tables received special treatment. How men in expensive suits sometimes disappeared into the private dining room with Mr. Luciano himself. But I'd been too busy trying to pay my rent and my nursing school bills to pay any attention to restaurant politics. What's the worst that can happen? They've already sent back 3 dishes, I reasoned, already reaching for a clean apron. Maybe a fresh face will help. Giorgio and Marco exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher before Giorgio finally sighed. "Fine, just be respectful." Very respectful. With steady hands but a wildly hammering heart, I approached table 7. The first thing I noticed was the silence. An unnatural pocket of quiet amid the restaurant's usual gentle hum. The second was the small figure hunched in the corner of the booth. A girl, maybe 16, with dark hair falling like a curtain around her pale face. Her thin arms were crossed tightly across her chest, her designer dress hanging from shoulders that seemed far too delicate to bear its weight. But it was the man beside her who stole all the air from my lungs. Antonio Castellano didn't even look up as I approached, his attention completely fixed on his phone. Still, his presence filled the space like a physical force. Broad shoulders strained against the fine fabric of his suit, and a watch glinted on his wrist that could have paid off my student loans in a single shot. Dark hair, threaded with silver at the temples, was swept back from a face that seemed carved from marble, all sharp angles and uncompromising lines. 2 men in dark suits stood nearby, their eyes constantly scanning the restaurant, their hands positioned in a way that suggested concealed weapons. One nodded almost imperceptibly as I approached, a silent acknowledgement of my presence before I even made a sound. "Excuse me," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I understand there's been an issue with the meal." Finally, Castellano looked up. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, amber and deep and burning with something I couldn't quite name. For one heart-stopping moment, his gaze swept over me. Not the dismissive glance I usually received from most patrons, but a thorough assessment that seemed to catalog every detail, from my sensible shoes to my hastily pinned-up hair. "The issue," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated right through me, "is that my daughter hasn't eaten properly in 3 days." His accent was subtle but unmistakable Italian, softening the edges of his English. "The doctor says she must eat, but she refuses everything." The girl, his daughter, sank deeper into her seat, turning her face toward the wall. 3 restaurants tonight," Castellano continued, sliding his phone into his jacket pocket with deliberate movements. "All special requests, all failures. I should have apologized. I should have offered to bring the chef himself to discuss alternatives. Instead, I looked at the girl, really looked at her. The hollowness in her cheeks, the dark circles beneath eyes that held a storm of emotions. "May I sit?" I asked her directly, not her father. Surprise flickered across both their faces. One of the suited men stepped forward, but Castellano raised a hand, stopping him without a word or even a glance. After a moment of tense silence, he slid over, creating some space. I settled at the edge of the booth, my knees brushing against expensive wool as I faced the girl. "I'm Sophia," I said softly. "What's your name?" "Isabella." She whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Isabella," I repeated with a smile. "That's beautiful. I had a grandmother named Isabella. She was stubborn, too. It was a dangerous gamble, but something told me this girl needed honesty more than deference." I felt Castellano stiffen beside me, but I kept my eyes on his daughter. "I'm not stubborn," she protested weakly. "I'm just not hungry." "Maybe not for tortellini," I agreed. "When I'm upset, I can't eat proper meals either." Her eyes flickered to mine. A brief connection. "Who says I'm upset?" "Your eyes do." I leaned slightly closer, lowering my voice as if I was sharing a secret. "Also, you've completely destroyed your napkin." She glanced down at the linen napkin, twisted into knots on her lap. The corners were frayed where she'd worried them between her fingers. "When was the last time you actually wanted to eat something?" I asked. "Not what someone told you to eat, but what you craved." Isabella shrugged, then hesitated. "Last week, before everything, I had a grilled cheese sandwich at my friend's house. It was good." "Grilled cheese," I repeated, feeling Castellano's eyes boring into me. "Simple comfort food. I make a pretty amazing grilled cheese if I do say so myself. Secret ingredient and everything." "This is a 5-star restaurant," Castellano interjected, his voice controlled but tight with frustration. "We're not ordering grilled cheese." I turned to him then, meeting those intimidating eyes directly. "With all due respect, Mr. Castellano, would you rather have your daughter eat grilled cheese or nothing at all?" The air between us thickened. From the corner of my eye, I saw one of his men step closer, his hand drifting toward his jacket. I definitely crossed a line, spoken far too directly to a man who clearly wasn't accustomed to being challenged. My heart pounded against my ribs as I waited for his response, already calculating how quickly I could find another waitressing job after being fired. But then something unexpected happened. The hard line of his mouth softened just a fraction, and something like reluctant appreciation flickered in his eyes. "Make the grilled cheese," he said to me, not Giorgio, who had materialized nearby, hovering anxiously. "Yourself." I nodded, rising from the booth on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. "I'll need a few ingredients that might not be in the kitchen." 10 minutes. "Whatever you need," he replied. And I had the distinct impression that the statement extended far beyond cheese and bread. In the kitchen, Marco looked at me like I'd completely lost my mind when I requested white bread, American cheese, and a specific brand of butter. "Do you want to serve Antonio Castellano's daughter a children's sandwich?" he hissed. "I want to serve her something she'll eat," I corrected, already gathering the ingredients, "and I need some space to work." Surprisingly, he backed away, muttering something in Italian under his breath. I worked quickly, mixing my grandmother's secret addition, a sprinkle of garlic powder, and spreading a thin layer of mayonnaise on the outside of the bread for perfect browning. The simple ritual of cooking centered me, pushing away the lingering awareness of those amber eyes and the sheer power they wielded. When I returned to table 7, carrying the golden brown sandwich on one of our elegant white plates, Isabella straightened up in her seat. I slid it in front of her without ceremony, cutting it diagonally the way my mother always had for me. "Try it," I encouraged, acutely aware of Castellano watching every move. "If you hate it, I promise to leave you alone." Isabella hesitated, then picked up half the sandwich. The moment she took the first bite, something in her face changed, a softening, a small spark of pleasure breaking through the wall of whatever had been tormenting her. She took another bite, larger this time. "It's good," she murmured, sounding almost surprised. The tension around the table dissipated like morning fog under the sunlight. Isabella continued eating, taking small, deliberate bites, while I stood awkwardly, unsure whether I should leave or stay. When she'd finished half the sandwich, she looked up at me with the ghost of a smile. "Thank you," she said simply. I nodded, preparing to retreat, when Castellano's voice stopped me. "Your name," he said, not a question, but a softly rapped command. "Sophia," I answered. "Sophia Ricci." "Italian?" he asked, one eyebrow arched. "On my father's side. I never knew him." Something unreadable passed across his features. "You've done what 3 renowned chefs could not, Sophia Ricci." My daughter ate. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones," I replied, gathering my courage. "And sometimes people just need to be seen, not served." The moment the words left my lips, I regretted their boldness. But Castellano didn't look offended. If anything, his expression held something like curiosity, as if I were a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. "I'll take care of your table for the rest of the evening," I said, stepping back. "Please let me know if there's anything else you need." I felt his eyes follow me as I walked away, a physical weight between my shoulder blades. Only when I pushed through the kitchen doors did I release the breath I'd been holding, my hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. "Still alive?" Marco asked, only half joking. "Apparently," I murmured, leaning against the counter. The girl ate the sandwich. Marco crossed himself reflexively. "Madre Dio, you have more courage than brains, Sophia. I thought that would be the end of it. Just an unusual encounter to recount to my roommate later." But when Castellano's party finally rose to leave an hour later, Giorgio approached me with an envelope. "Mr. Castellano asked me to give you this," he said, his expression unreadable. "And he said to tell you they'll be back tomorrow night. He's requesting you specifically." The envelope contained $500 bills, more money than I made in a week. I stared at it, a cold feeling settling in my stomach despite the generous tip. Something told me I'd made a grave mistake, that in trying to help a troubled girl, I'd inadvertently caught the attention of a dangerous man. The realization washed over me as I watched through the window as Castellano helped his daughter into a sleek black car surrounded by men in suits. Just before sliding into the vehicle himself, he paused, turning his head to look back at the restaurant. Despite the distance and the darkened glass, I could have sworn those amber eyes found mine, a silent promise that our paths would cross again. I didn't know then how that simple act of kindness, a grilled cheese sandwich for a troubled girl, would irrevocably alter the course of my life. How it would lead me from the safety of anonymity into a world of shadows and power, of danger and unexpected passion. I didn't know that the next time Antonio Castellano walked through the door, everything would change. Sleep completely evaded me that night, my mind replaying the entire encounter with Antonio Castellano and his daughter. Something about Isabella's hollow eyes haunted me, a familiar emptiness I recognized all too well. I'd seen that same vacant stare reflected back at me years ago, when grief had hollowed me out and food became more of an enemy than sustenance. By morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin as I dragged myself through my nursing classes, struggling to focus on the instructor's lecture about proper medication dosages. The $500 sat untouched in my drawer back at home, far too heavy with implications to even consider spending it. When I arrived at Luciano's that evening, a strange tension permeated the air. Staff members cast curious glances my way, whispering behind their hands as I tied on my apron. "What?" I finally asked Lena, another waitress, as she hovered nearby. She leaned closer, her voice hushed. "Is it true you're serving Castellano again tonight?" "Apparently," I replied, a wave of discomfort crawling up my spine. "What's the big deal?" "He's just another customer." Lena's eyes widened. "Just another customer? Sophia, do you even have any idea who he is?" Before she could elaborate, Giorgio appeared, his usually impeccable appearance somehow even more polished tonight. "Sophia, a word." He led me to the small office behind the kitchen, closing the door with deliberate care. "Mr. Castellano has reserved the private dining room tonight, just him, his daughter, and his security detail." He paused, studying me with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably. "You'll be their only server." "Why me?" The question just escaped before I could stop it. Giorgio's expression remained carefully neutral. "Mr. Castellano doesn't explain his requests, and I don't question them. But you should know that Antonio Castellano is not merely a wealthy patron. His business interests extend throughout the city. Mr. Luciano considers his continued patronage essential." The implication hung heavy in the air between us. I wasn't exactly naive. Growing up in this neighborhood, I'd heard enough to understand what business interests likely meant. The pieces clicked into place. The armed guards, the deference, the hushed whispers. "He's connected," I said flatly, not a question. Giorgio nodded once. "Be professional. Be attentive." And Sophia. His eyes held a clear warning. "Don't get personally involved. Not with him, not with his family matters. Serve the food, nothing more." The private dining room occupied the back corner of the restaurant, accessible through a discreet doorway and decorated in the same opulent style as the main dining area, but with an added layer of luxury. Hand-painted murals adorned the walls, and a crystal chandelier cast warm light over a single table set for two. I arrived early to prepare the space, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the silverware and crystal glasses. The door opened precisely at 7, and Antonio Castellano strode in, his presence immediately filling the room. Tonight, he wore a charcoal suit that accentuated the breadth of his shoulders. No tie, with the top buttons of his crisp white shirt casually undone to reveal a glimpse of tan skin. Isabella followed, looking marginally better than the previous evening. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, exposing the delicate features of her face. She wore jeans and a sweater, unexpectedly casual, given her father's attire. "Sophia," Castellano acknowledged, my name rolling off his tongue with an intimacy that sent a small jolt right through me. Not Miss or Waitress. He'd remembered my name. "Mr. Castellano," I replied, carefully maintaining professional distance in my tone. "Isabella, it's nice to see you again." Isabella offered a ghost of a smile, settling into her chair as her father held it for her. The two security guards positioned themselves outside the door, effectively sealing us inside this private bubble. "I trust you received my appreciation for your assistance last night," Castellano said, taking his seat across from his daughter. "Yes, it was very generous," I answered, unable to meet his gaze directly. "Too generous." "I decide what's generous," he replied, the statement brooking absolutely no argument. "Isabella ate this morning. Toast, but still it's progress." A wave of pride warmed my chest before I could suppress it. "I'm glad to hear that. I've taken the liberty of arranging tonight's menu," he continued, "unless Isabella has other preferences." His daughter simply shrugged, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "Whatever you think, Papa." I served their meals as instructed. Simple Italian comfort foods, rather than the restaurant's usual elaborate offerings. Throughout the evening, I maintained a careful distance, responding to Castellano's questions with polite brevity and focusing my attention on Isabella whenever possible. The girl gradually relaxed as the meal progressed, picking at her food with increasing interest. When I brought dessert, cannoli with fresh ricotta, she actually smiled. "Sophia," Castellano said as I cleared their plates, "my daughter has a question for you." Isabella shot her father a look of betrayal before turning to me, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It's nothing, really. Ask her," Castellano insisted gently. Isabella sighed. "I just wondered, how did you know about the grilled cheese?" I hesitated, aware of Castellano's intense focus. "When I was 16, my mother died suddenly. For months afterward, I could barely eat. Everything tasted like ash." The confession just emerged, completely unbidden, surprising me with its honesty. But sometimes simple foods, things that reminded me of happier times, those I could manage. Isabella's eyes widened with recognition. "My mom left 2 weeks ago," she whispered. "She said she couldn't take it anymore. The life, the rules, the constant watching." Her eyes darted nervously toward her father, who remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate but still sincere. Castellano's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing beneath the skin. That's enough, Isabella. An uncomfortable silence descended. I retreated to refill their water glasses, wishing I could somehow dissolve into the background. My wife, Castellano said suddenly, surprising me, decided our marriage was inconvenient. She's currently in Milan with her tennis instructor. The bitterness in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Papa, Isabella protested weakly. He reached across the table, covering his daughter's hand with his own. I'm sorry she hurt you, Toro, but we are Castellanos. We endure. The tenderness in the gesture contrasted sharply with the hardness in his voice, offering a brief glimpse of something unexpected. A father's love, fierce and protective, beneath that intimidating exterior. As they prepared to leave, Isabella hugged me impulsively. A brief but genuine embrace that caught me completely off guard. Thank you, she murmured before her father gently guided her toward the door. Castellano lingered, turning back to me when Isabella had stepped outside with one of the guards. My daughter starts at Westfield Academy on Monday, he said, adjusting his cuffs with precise movements. She'll need to maintain her strength, her appetite. I nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. I want you to come to my home tomorrow, he stated. Not a request, but a firm declaration. Teach my chef what you did. Show him how to prepare the foods she'll eat. Alarm flared through me. Mr. Castellano, I'm flattered, but I'm not a professional chef. I'm just a waitress putting myself through nursing school. You're someone my daughter trusts, he countered. Someone who made her eat when no one else could. He withdrew a business card from his jacket pocket, placing it on the table between us. My driver will collect you at noon. I have classes in the morning, I protested weakly. Then he'll collect you afterward. His tone made it clear that the matter was already decided. You'll be well compensated for your time, Ms. Ricci. I should have refused. Should have invented some excuse, any excuse. But something in those intense amber eyes made the refusal simply die in my throat. Curiosity, perhaps, or something far more dangerous. A pull toward this man and his wounded daughter that defied any rational explanation. Just this once, I stipulated, somehow finding a shred of backbone. To help Isabella. A smile curved his lips, not exactly warm, but satisfied. Victorious, of course. Of course. Just to help Isabella. Even then, I recognized the lie. But I picked up his card anyway. The next day, a sleek black Bentley waited outside my apartment building. A jarring contrast to the faded brick and graffiti-covered walls of my neighborhood. The driver, a stern-faced man with the build of a professional fighter, opened the door without a single word. My roommate, Elena, peered through our second-story window, her mouth agape. Sophia, what the hell? She mouthed, gesturing wildly at the luxury car. I just shrugged helplessly, sliding into the soft leather back seat. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and rich leather, a completely different world from the bus I usually took across town. As we pulled away from the curb, anxiety twisted in my stomach. What in the world was I doing? Entering the private world of a man like Antonio Castellano. A man who, if the whispers were even remotely true, operated in shadows that most people spent their entire lives desperately avoiding. 40 minutes later, we passed through ornate wrought iron gates into a sprawling estate on the city's outskirts. The House Mansion really rose before us. A modern fortress of stone and glass surrounded by meticulously landscaped grounds. Security cameras tracked our approach, and men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter with the disciplined movements of highly trained professionals. The driver escorted me inside through a soaring entryway with gleaming marble floors and art I suspected belonged in museums. The wealth on display was absolutely staggering, but somehow lacked the warmth that transforms a house into a home. No family photos adorned the walls. No personal touches softened the impeccable design. Ms. Ricci. I turned to find Castellano descending a curved staircase, dressed more casually than I'd seen him before, in dark slacks and a gray cashmere sweater that somehow managed to make him appear even more imposing, rather than relaxed. He'd rolled the sleeves up, revealing corded forearms and the edge of what looked like a tattoo disappearing beneath the fabric. "Mr. Castellano," I acknowledged, suddenly self-conscious of my simple jeans and blouse. "Your home is beautiful." "It serves its purpose," he replied, approaching with measured steps. "Isabella will be down shortly. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Something in his tone suggested surprise, as if his daughter's interest in me was entirely unexpected. Before I could respond, he gestured for me to follow him through the house to a kitchen that would have made even professional chefs weep with envy. Gleaming stainless steel appliances, vast marble countertops, and equipment I didn't even recognize. A man in chef's whites straightened as we entered, his knife pausing mid-chop. "Mr. Castellano," he greeted, his eyes flicking curiously to me. "This is Ms. Ricci," Castellano explained. "She'll be showing you how to prepare several dishes for Isabella." The chef, Henri, as I soon learned, initially bristled at taking direction from a waitress. But as I began preparing a simple grilled cheese, adding my grandmother's secret touches, his professional interest gradually overcame his pride. Soon we were discussing other comfort foods that Isabella might be willing to accept. Mac and cheese with a nutritional boost, simple soups, and Italian classics stripped down to their essence. I was demonstrating how to make my mother's chicken soup when I felt a subtle shift in the air. Looking up, I found Castellano leaning against the doorframe, watching me with an intensity that made my hands falter. How long had he been standing there, silently observing as I moved through his kitchen, instructing his staff? "Sorry," I said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "I got carried away." "Don't apologize," he replied, crossing the kitchen to stand beside me. He peered into the pot, inhaling the aromatic steam. "It smells like my grandmother's kitchen in Naples." "High praise," I said, attempting some lightness despite his unnerving proximity. He stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, something woodsy and exclusive. "Isabella hasn't left her room for anything but meals since her mother left," he said quietly, for my ears alone. "Today she asked to come downstairs to see you." Guilt and something like pleasure tangled in my chest. "I haven't done anything special." "You saw her," he countered. "Not as Antonio Castellano's daughter, but as a girl in pain." His eyes held mine, searching. "Why did you approach our table that night, Sophia?" The truth, the directness of the question caught me off guard. "I told you." She reminded me of myself at that age. "And you always rush to help strangers who remind you of yourself?" His skepticism was evident. "Not usually," I admitted. "But sometimes we recognize kindred spirits, people carrying the same kind of wounds." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. For a breathless moment, I thought he might say more, might reveal something of the man beneath the power and control. But then Isabella appeared in the doorway, and the moment shattered. "Sophia," she called, a genuine smile brightening her face. "Papa said you were teaching Henri to make your special grilled cheese." Days stretched into weeks, and despite my initial resolve that my visit to the Castellano estate would be just this once, I found myself returning regularly. What began as cooking lessons for Henri evolved into something more complex. Informal therapy sessions where Isabella would perch on a kitchen stool, watching me prepare comfort foods while gradually sharing pieces of her fractured world. Antonio never explicitly asked me to continue coming, yet somehow the arrangement became routine. His driver would collect me after my Thursday classes and occasionally on Sundays, bringing me to the mansion where I'd spend hours in the kitchen with Isabella, talking while we cooked. "My mother used to bake," Isabella confided one afternoon as we kneaded pasta dough, flour dusting our forearms. "Before everything changed, before we moved to the big house and she started drinking at lunch." I maintained a neutral expression, though each revelation about the Castellano family dynamics fascinated and troubled me in equal measure. "Sometimes when our circumstances change, people struggle to adapt," I offered carefully. "Papa says she was weak," Isabella said, her fingers working the dough with more force than necessary. "That she knew who he was when she married him, and there it was, the elephant that perpetually occupied the room." Who Antonio Castellano was, what he did, the source of the wealth that surrounded us, the reason armed men patrolled the grounds, why Isabella had been withdrawn from her previous school after her mother's departure. Security concerns, Antonio had explained curtly when I'd asked. I'd never directly questioned him about his business, maintaining the polite fiction that he was merely a successful entrepreneur with unusually high security requirements, but I wasn't naive. The whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, the men who arrived for closed-door meetings, the way Isabella carefully avoided mentioning anything about her father's work. It painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Everyone has different strengths, I said diplomatically, showing Isabella how to roll the pasta thinner. Maybe your mother's weren't the kind your father understood. Isabella considered this, dark eyes so like her father's thoughtful. Papa respects you, she said suddenly. I can tell. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I'm just helping with your meals, I deflected. No, she insisted with teenage certainty. It's more than that. He watches you when you don't notice and he listens when you speak. Really listens. He doesn't do that with many people. I focused intently on cutting the pasta into even strips, unsure how to respond. I'd felt Antonio's eyes tracking me through the house, had noticed how he'd begun lingering in the kitchen during my visits, asking questions about my studies, my aspirations. Small conversations that somehow felt weighted with unspoken currents. Your father is just concerned about you, I said finally. He wants you to be healthy. Isabella rolled her eyes, a glimpse of normal teenage behavior that secretly delighted me. He had Henry before and Dr. Levine and that nutritionist from Switzerland, but he keeps bringing you back. She lowered her voice dramatically. I think he likes you. Isabella? I chided, embarrassment and something more dangerous fluttering in my stomach. That's not. What are we discussing so intently? Antonio's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, interrupted from the doorway. I startled, nearly dropping the pasta cutter. He stood watching us, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to expose strong forearms. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. Pasta secrets, Isabella answered promptly, eyes sparkling with mischief. Girls only. Is that so? Antonio approached, inspecting our handiwork. Looks like my Nana's recipe. Similar, I acknowledged, acutely aware of his proximity as he leaned over the counter beside me. But with a modern twist, his eyes caught mine, amusement warming their amber depths. You're full of surprises, Sophia Ricci. The way he said my name, letting each syllable roll off his tongue with that subtle Italian inflection, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I'd been fighting an unwelcome attraction to Antonio Castellano since that first night at the restaurant, tamping down the inappropriate flutter whenever he entered a room. He was my employer, essentially, a man whispered to be dangerous, a widower still bitter about his wife's betrayal. Mr. Reynolds is waiting in your study, sir, announced one of the security team from the doorway, breaking the moment. Antonio straightened, his expression cooling instantly. Tell him I'll be there shortly. He turned to Isabella, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Homework after dinner, tesoro. She nodded. The easy affection between them a stark contrast to the sudden businesslike demeanor that had overtaken him. As he left, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted as though he'd taken some essential energy with him. See, Isabella whispered once he was out of earshot. He never checks on me when Mrs. Abernathy is here. Mrs. Abernathy, I'd learned, was Isabella's tutor, a stern woman who came daily to continue her education until arrangements for her new school were finalized. I shook my head, reaching for the tomatoes we'd need for the sauce. Let's focus on dinner, shall we? Later, after Isabella had gone upstairs to complete her assignments, I was gathering my things to leave when Antonio reappeared. He'd shed the businesslike demeanor from earlier, but something dark lingered in his eyes, a focused attention in the set of his shoulders. Leaving so soon? He asked, moving to the bar cart in the corner of the kitchen, an unusual feature that I'd noted on my first visit. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. My shift starts in 2 hours, I explained, checking my watch. Thursday night is always busy at Luciano's. He nodded, taking a slow sip of his drink. You've been good for her, he said after a moment. Isabella. She's eating regularly now, talking more. Pride warmed my chest despite my efforts to remain professionally detached. She just needed someone to listen. Someone outside the situation. Someone who understands loss, he added perceptively. You mentioned your mother died when you were her age. I nodded, surprised he'd remembered that detail from weeks ago. Car accident, drunk driver. And your father? Never in the picture, I said with practiced indifference. Left before I was born. Antonio studied me over the rim of his glass. So you raised yourself. I had my grandmother until I was 18, I corrected. She taught me everything I know about cooking, about survival really. And now you're putting yourself through nursing school while working full-time. It wasn't a question. Admirable. I shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. Just doing what needs to be done. A rare quality, he observed. Most people take the easy path when offered. There was no easy path to take, I said simply. He set down his glass, approaching me with measured steps. I've been thinking, Sophia. Your arrangement with Luciano's, it's limiting your potential. Your studies suffer because of the hours. Alarm prickled along my skin. I need that job, Mr. Castellano. Antonio, he corrected, not for the first time. And what you need is time to complete your education without exhausting yourself. He leaned against the counter, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. The subtle cologne that had become distractingly familiar. I'd like to offer you a position here. Part-time, better hours, significantly better compensation. My mouth went dry. Doing what exactly? Continuing what you've already begun, he said smoothly. Working with Isabella on her nutrition. Helping her adjust to her new circumstances. She trusts you. That's invaluable to me. The offer was tempting, dangerously so. The hours at Luciano's were grueling. My grades suffering as I struggled to balance work and studies. Yet something about formalizing my relationship with the Castellanos felt like crossing a threshold I wasn't certain I should approach. I don't know, I hedged. I'm not a therapist or a nutritionist. I'm just someone my daughter connects with, he finished. Someone who saw her when she was invisible. His voice dropped lower, something intense entering his gaze. Someone who isn't afraid to speak honestly, even to me. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something I couldn't or wouldn't name. I took an instinctive step backward, creating distance. Consider it, he said, not pressing further. The offer remains open. His driver took me back to my apartment in silence, leaving me to wrestle with conflicting emotions. The rational part of my brain screamed warnings, reminding me of Giorgio's advice to avoid personal involvement, of the whispers about Castellano's business dealings, of the subtle threat that seemed to underpin his unfailing courtesy. But another part, a part one was increasingly struggling to ignore, was drawn to the complexity of the man I was glimpsing beneath the power and control. The father who clearly adored his daughter, the man whose eyes sometimes revealed flashes of loneliness that echoed my own. 2 days later, I found myself in Giorgio's office at Luciano's, resignation letter in hand. You're making a mistake, he said bluntly, not bothering to hide his disapproval. Working directly for Castellano, it's different than serving his table, Sophia. You'll be in his world now. It's just part-time, I argued, though the distinction felt flimsy, even to my own ears. Better hours, better pay. I can focus more on my studies. Giorgio's expression remained grim. That's how it starts. Small steps. Before you know it, you're in too deep to find your way back out. You're being dramatic, I said, discomfort making me defensive. I'm helping his daughter with her eating issues, not joining the family business. His eyebrows shot up at my flippant reference to what we both knew lay beneath the surface. Listen to me carefully, Sophia. Antonio Castellano is not just some wealthy businessman. He's the head of one of the most powerful organizations in this city. Nothing in his world happens by accident. Not who he meets, not who he employs, not who he allows close to his family. A chill crept up my spine despite the warmth of the small office. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying be careful what door you walk through," Giorgio replied, his voice softening with genuine concern. "Some can't be closed again." I left Luciano's that night with a strange sense of finality, as if I'd made a choice far more significant than simply changing jobs. Elena's reaction when I told her mirrored Giorgio's, her usual easygoing nature replaced by uncharacteristic seriousness. "The Antonio Castellano?" she demanded, eyes wide. "Sophia, those rumors about his connections aren't just gossip. My cousin works at the courthouse. The things she's heard." "I'm not naive," I insisted, folding laundry with more force than necessary. "I know he's probably connected, but I'm not involved in any of that. This is about Isabella." Elena gave me a look of profound skepticism. "Men like that don't hire pretty young women just to make sandwiches for their kids." Heat rushed to my face. "It's not like that." "No?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me he hasn't looked at you that way? That you haven't noticed?" I couldn't answer honestly, so I changed the subject. My first official day at the Castellano estate arrived with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The driver, Marco, I'd learned, collected me mid-morning, the now familiar route to the mansion giving me time to collect my thoughts. I dressed carefully in dark jeans and a simple blouse, professional but comfortable for cooking. The house seemed different somehow now that I was officially employed rather than a guest. I noticed details I'd overlooked before. The subtle security measures, the strategic placement of cameras, the way certain rooms remained firmly closed, voices occasionally drifting from behind heavy doors. Isabella greeted me with unexpected enthusiasm, hugging me tightly. "Finally," she exclaimed. "Now you can teach me to make tiramisu. Henri always says I'm too young." I laughed, her excitement momentarily easing my nerves. "We'll see. Maybe we start with something simpler first." We spent the morning in the kitchen preparing lunch together while she chatted about the books she was reading, the shows she missed from her old school, the dress she wanted for an upcoming family event, normal teenage concerns that made it easy to forget the unusual circumstances. It was only when Antonio appeared in the doorway, phone in hand and security detail hovering nearby, that reality reasserted itself. "Sophia," Antonio acknowledged, his eyes lingering on me a beat longer than necessary before turning to his daughter. "Isabella, how are your studies progressing?" Isabella groaned dramatically, the universal teenage response to parental inquiry about schoolwork. Mrs. Abernathy assigned another essay on Roman history, as if living with an actual Italian isn't education enough. A smile touched the corner of Antonio's mouth, one of those rare, genuine expressions that transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Perhaps Sophia can help you with that, considering her own academic success." I raised an eyebrow, surprised he knew about my academic standing. "I'm not sure my expertise in pharmacology translates to ancient history." "You maintained a 3.9 GPA while working full-time," he countered smoothly. "I believe that demonstrates an aptitude for balancing priorities." The casual revelation of knowledge he shouldn't possess sent a chill down my spine. Had he researched me? Of course he had. Men like Antonio Castellano didn't invite strangers into their homes, into their children's lives without thorough vetting. "Papa has a file on everyone," Isabella Stage whispered, rolling her eyes. "It's super creepy." "Isabella," Antonio chided, though without real heat. "Security measures, not creepiness." I forced a light laugh, trying to dispel the sudden tension. "Well, my study habits are hardly classified information, but I'm happy to help with the essay if you'd like." "Isabella." Antonio's phone vibrated in his hand. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening instantly. "I need to take this." "Isabella, remember you have an appointment with Dr. Marshall at 4 o'clock. With that, he disappeared down the hallway, already speaking rapid Italian into the phone, his security detail closing ranks behind him. "Dr. Marshall?" I asked, attempting to sound casual as I returned to chopping vegetables for our lunch. "Therapist?" Isabella sighed, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. Papa thinks I need to process my feelings about Mother's departure, as if talking about it changes anything. I measured my response carefully. Sometimes naming our feelings helps take away their power over us. She shot me a look of teenage skepticism. You sound like Dr. Marshall. Smart woman, I replied with a gentle smile. She asks a lot of questions about Papa. Isabella continued, her voice lowering conspiratorially. About his business, his friends, who visits the house. My knife paused mid-chop. What kind of questions? Isabella shrugged. Like, does he have meetings late at night? Do I ever hear arguing? Has anyone ever threatened him in front of me? She reached for a cherry tomato, popping it into her mouth. I'm not stupid. I know what she's really asking. A knot formed in my stomach. And what did you tell her? Nothing, she replied with surprising fierceness. We're Castellanos. Family loyalty above all else. The conviction in her voice, so adult, so rehearsed, broke my heart a little. She was 16, caught between childhood and adulthood, already carrying the weight of family secrets. Your father wants what's best for you, I said carefully. That's why he arranged for you to talk to Dr. Marshall. Papa wants to make sure I'm not damaged like Mother, she countered with brutal honesty. That I won't crack under pressure, that I'm worthy of the name. Before I could respond, one of Antonio's assistants appeared in the doorway. Diane? A severe woman who managed the household with military precision. Ms. Ricci, Mr. Castellano would like to see you in his study when you've finished with Isabella's lunch. My pulse quickened. I'd never been invited into Antonio's private study before. Of course, we're nearly done here. After ensuring Isabella was settled with her meal and homework, I made my way through the mansion's west wing, where Antonio kept his home office. The security presence intensified in this part of the house. 2 men stationed outside the heavy mahogany door, their watchful eyes tracking my approach. One of them knocked sharply before opening the door for me, not bothering to wait for a response from inside. The implicit trust that Antonio's men could interrupt him without permission spoke volumes about the hierarchy within the household. The study beyond matched its owner. Imposing, meticulously organized, and undeniably masculine. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes in multiple languages. A massive desk of dark wood dominated the space, behind which Antonio sat reviewing documents, his focus absolute until the door closed behind me. Sophia, he greeted, rising to his feet with fluid grace. Thank you for coming. Please sit. I perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing his desk, hyper-aware of the intimacy of being alone with him in this space that felt distinctly private. Isabella mentioned her therapy sessions. He began without preamble, retaking his seat. I assume she expressed her usual reluctance. She's a teenager, I replied diplomatically. Resistance to therapy is practically required at that age. A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. Indeed. However, in this case, her reluctance may be warranted. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Dr. Marshall was recommended by Isabella's new school, but I've recently discovered her connection to Detective James Sullivan. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Antonio said it, careful, measured, conveyed its significance. Sullivan heads the organized crime division, he explained, watching me closely. He has a particular interest in my business affairs. There it was, the first direct acknowledgement of what had remained unspoken between us. My pulse quickened, a mixture of apprehension and something shamefully like excitement coursing through me. You believe the therapist is gathering information? I stated, not a question. Antonio's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing my reaction. I know she is. The question becomes, what do I do about it? I shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because Isabella trusts you, he replied simply. More than she trusts this therapist, more than the security team, perhaps even more than she trusts me at the moment. His jaw tightened fractionally. Her mother's departure has left her vulnerable to manipulation. You want me to what? Spy on her therapy sessions? I asked incredulously. No, he corrected sharply. I want you to be an alternative, someone she can speak to freely without fear of her words being twisted or used against her family. Against him, he meant. The implication hung in the air between us. I'm not a therapist, I reminded him, and I'm not comfortable being placed in the middle of whatever this is. Antonio studied me for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Your integrity is precisely why Isabella responds to you. Why? He stopped, recalibrated. It's a quality I respect, Sophia. The compliment, unexpected and seemingly genuine, caught me off guard. Thank you. I'm not asking you to spy, he continued, his voice softening. Merely to be present, to continue as you have been. A stabilizing influence during a difficult transition. Put that way, it seemed reasonable enough. Yet beneath the surface of these requests lurked deeper currents. Boundaries being tested, loyalties being assessed. I was being drawn further into the Castellano orbit, and a voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings I was becoming too adept at ignoring. I care about Isabella, I said finally. I want to help her through this, but I need to be clear. I won't report to you about things she tells me in confidence. Not unless it involves her safety. A smile curved his lips, not entirely warm. I would expect nothing less. As I rose to leave, he spoke again. There's a family gathering this weekend. My father's birthday celebration. Isabella would appreciate your presence. It wasn't quite a command, but neither was it truly a request. The invisible lines between employer and employee, between professional distance and personal involvement, blurred further. I have classes Saturday morning, I hedged. Saturday evening, he countered smoothly. Black tie. My driver will collect you at 7. I should have refused, should have maintained the boundaries already dangerously compromised. Instead, I heard myself say, I'll need to find something appropriate to wear. His eyes traveled over me briefly, an assessment that sent heat rushing to my cheeks. I'll have something sent to your apartment. That's really not necessary. Sophia, he interrupted gently. You'll be entering a world where appearances matter. Let me ensure you're comfortable in it. 2 days later, a package arrived at my apartment. A dress of midnight blue silk that probably cost more than 3 months' rent, accompanied by shoes and a delicate silver necklace. Elena whistled low when I tried it on, the fabric flowing like water over my curves, cut modestly yet unmistakably feminine. You're still going to tell me this is just about his daughter? She asked pointedly. I avoided her gaze, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from the perfect garment. It's business. He's my employer. Employers don't buy dresses like that for their staff, she countered. Be careful, Sophia. Men like him, they see something they want, they take it. Her words echoed in my mind Saturday evening as Marco drove me through iron gates I was becoming too familiar with, toward a house now ablaze with lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, men in suits and women in evening gowns entering the mansion that had been transformed for the occasion. My nervousness must have been evident, for Marco, usually taciturn to the point of rudeness, offered a rare comment as he opened my door. Deep breath. They're just people with money. Most of them not as smart as you. The unexpected encouragement steadied me as I made my way up the marble steps, the silk of the borrowed dress whispering against my skin with each movement. Inside, the foyer had been transformed into an elegant reception area, waitstaff circulating with champagne, and hors d'oeuvres among clusters of guests speaking in hushed, important tones. I felt immediately out of place, an imposter in borrowed finery. Dressed to the nines, I scanned the crowd, hoping to spot Isabella's familiar face. Instead, my eyes locked with a pair of amber eyes from across the room. Antonio moved through the throng with such effortless authority. Conversations seemed to part before him like the Red Sea. He was wearing a tuxedo that accentuated the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his physique, custom-made, no doubt, to accommodate the subtle bulge beneath his left arm, which I now recognized as a concealed weapon. You came, he said, once he reached me. His voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the ambient noise of the gathering. You didn't leave much room for refusal, I replied. accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, just to give my hands something to do. A smile touched his lips. The dress suits you. Heat crept up my neck. Thank you, though it feels a bit like playing dress-up. You underestimate yourself, he countered, his gaze traveling briefly over me in a way that was not entirely professional. You belong in silk, Sophia. Before I could formulate a response to the unexpectedly intimate comment, Isabella appeared at her father's side, radiant in a deep crimson dress that made her look older than her 16 years. Sophia, she exclaimed, embracing me with genuine warmth. You look amazing, doesn't she, Papa? Antonio's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Indeed she does. Now there are people waiting to greet you, Toro. Your grandfather especially. Isabella rolled her eyes good-naturedly. He just wants to complain that I'm too thin and try to force-feed me cannoli. She turned to me. Come meet him. He'll love you, especially when I tell him you got me eating again. She looped her arm through mine, guiding me deeper into the gathering with surprising confidence for a teenager. As we moved through the crowd, I became acutely aware of the scrutiny directed our way. Curious glances, whispered comments, assessing looks from women draped in diamonds and men with calculated smiles. Everyone's staring, I murmured to Isabella. Of course they are, she replied matter-of-factly. You're with me, and you're new. In this world, new faces are always interesting. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Especially pretty ones who arrive with Papa's blessing. Isabella, I chided gently. I'm here to support you, not to make a statement. She gave me a look far too knowing for her age. Everything in Papa's world makes a statement, Sophia. Haven't you figured that out yet? The question lingered as she led me toward an elderly man holding court in the center of the room. Antonio Castellano, Sr., the patriarch of the family and, if the deference shown to him was any indication, a figure of considerable power in his own right. Antonio Castellano, Sr., commanded presence despite his advanced years. Impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that couldn't quite disguise the slight stoop of age, he retained the sharp amber eyes that his son had inherited, observant, assessing, missing nothing. When Isabella presented me, those eyes swept over me with undisguised curiosity. No, this is Sophia, Isabella announced proudly. She's the one who got me eating again. The elderly man studied me, his gaze unexpectedly penetrating. So, you're the miraculous Sophia I've heard so much about. His accent was thicker than his son's, the cadence of old country Italian shaping his words. My granddaughter speaks highly of you. The miracle was all Isabella's, I replied, extending my hand. I just made a sandwich. He laughed, a surprisingly warm sound, and took my offered hand between both of his. Modesty, a rare quality in my son's world. He patted my hand before releasing it. You've done our family a service, young lady. The Castellanos remember such things. Something about the way he said it, both gracious and vaguely ominous, sent a shiver down my spine. Tell me, he continued, gesturing for me to sit beside him on an elegant sofa. What is your family name again? Ritchie, I answered, settling carefully in the expensive silk dress. Ritchie, he repeated thoughtfully. From where? In Italy? Sicily originally, I believe. My grandmother mentioned Palermo, but it was generations ago. His eyebrows rose fractionally. Sicilian blood. That explains much. Before I could ask what he meant, Antonio appeared at our side, one hand coming to rest lightly on my shoulder. The casual touch sent warmth cascading through me despite its innocuous nature. I see you've met my father, he observed, his tone carefully neutral. Indeed, the elder Castellano replied, his eyes moving between us with shrewd assessment. An interesting addition to your household, Antonio. Unexpected. Something passed between father and son. An undercurrent of communication I couldn't decipher. Antonio's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on my shoulder. Isabella has grown quite attached, Antonio said simply. The old man's mouth curved in a knowing smile. Just Isabella? I felt heat rush to my cheeks as Antonio smoothly changed the subject, guiding the conversation toward family matters. I sat quietly, increasingly aware of being under evaluation, not just by the elder Castellano, but by everyone in the room. The weight of their collective scrutiny pressed against me like a physical thing. After what felt like an appropriate interval, I excused myself, needing a moment of respite from the intensity of the Castellano sphere. Finding a quiet hallway away from the main reception, I leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" came a female voice, cultured and faintly amused. I turned to find a striking woman watching me, champagne flute dangling elegantly from manicured fingers. Dark hair swept into a sophisticated updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She exuded the kind of effortless wealth that made my borrowed dress feel suddenly costume-like. "The first Castellano gathering is always disorienting," she continued, approaching with measured steps. "I'm Elisa Vinucci, Antonio's cousin." I accepted her outstretched hand. "Sophia Ricci." "Oh, I know who you are," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everyone does. The nursing student who tamed Isabella's hunger strike. Quite the accomplishment." Her tone carried an edge I couldn't quite identify, not hostile exactly, but not friendly either. Assessment, perhaps, or a warning. "It wasn't that dramatic," I demurred. "She was struggling after her mother left. Food became complicated." Elisa's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Valeria's departure was messy, though hardly surprising." She sipped her champagne, studying me over the rim. "Antonio has a type, you know." The implication hung in the air between us. I straightened, discomfort morphing into indignation. "I'm not Isabella's caretaker." "Of course," she finished smoothly. "My mistake." Before I could formulate a response, another voice interrupted, male, slightly slurred with alcohol. "Elisa, darling, are you terrorizing Antonio's new friend?" A man appeared beside her, handsome in a polished, superficial way. His eyes, slightly unfocused, swept over me with unconcealed interest. "Just making introductions, Matteo," Elisa replied coolly. "Sophia, my husband, Matteo Vinucci." "Pleasure," he drawled, taking my hand and holding it slightly too long. "So, you're the one who's had our Antonio distracted these past weeks." I extricated my hand, increasingly uncomfortable. "I should get back to Isabella." "Of course," Elisa smiled thinly. "Family first, always the Castellano way." As I turned to leave, she added softly, "Just a friendly suggestion, Sophia. Remember your place in this house. Antonio may find your authenticity refreshing, but novelty wears thin, especially in our world." The encounter left me rattled. The carefully constructed pretense that I was simply Isabella's caretaker, a professional relationship, nothing more, suddenly felt paper-thin and transparent. I moved through the party with heightened awareness, noticing the appraising glances, the whispered conversations that ceased as I passed. I found Isabella with a group of teenagers, cousins, and family connections, I presumed, looking almost normal, almost carefree. As they huddled around smartphones and shared inside jokes, she brightened when she saw me, waving me over. "Are you having fun?" she asked earnestly. "It's illuminating," I answered honestly. "Your grandfather is quite remarkable." She beamed. "Nono likes you. I can tell." "How can you tell?" "He asked questions," she replied simply. "If he didn't like you, he wouldn't bother." I glanced across the room to where the elder Castellano was engaged in conversation with Antonio, their heads bent close together, expressions serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. As if sensing my gaze, Antonio looked up, his eyes finding mine with unerring precision across the crowded room. Something electric passed between us, a current of recognition, of mutual awareness that transcended the physical distance. For a breathless moment, everything else receded: the glittering party, the curious onlookers, the weight of propriety. There was only his gaze, steady and intense, and the answering flare of heat in my veins. Then Isabella tugged at my arm, breaking the connection. "Come meet my cousins," she urged, pulling me toward her teenage circle. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and carefully navigated conversations. I sipped champagne sparingly, hyper-aware of maintaining composure in this unfamiliar territory. By the time dinner was announced, I'd met more Castellano relatives and associates than I could possibly remember, each interaction underscored by curiosity about my presence, my relationship to the family. I found myself seated at the main table between Isabella and an elderly aunt who peppered me with questions about my background, my education, my family, or lack thereof. Antonio sat across and several seats down, engaged in conversation with a silver-haired man introduced as a longtime business associate. Though he didn't look my way often, I felt his awareness like a physical touch, attuned to my movements, my responses, my comfort level in this rarefied atmosphere. After dinner, as musicians set up for dancing, Isabella was summoned by her grandfather, leaving me momentarily alone. I took the opportunity to step onto one of the terraces, grateful for the cool night air after the overwhelming intensity inside. The gardens below sprawled in manicured perfection, security lights illuminating the perimeter where men in dark suits patrolled with military precision. Even in celebration, the Castellano compound remained a fortress, beautiful, luxurious, but fortified nonetheless. Catching your breath? Antonio's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him approaching, 2 fresh champagne flutes in hand. He offered one to me, his fingers brushing mine in the exchange. It's a lot to take in, I admitted, accepting the glass. Your family is extensive. A smile touched his lips. And opinionated. I imagine they haven't been subtle in their curiosity about you. Subtlety doesn't seem to be a Castellano family trait, I observed, emboldened by champagne and the relative privacy of the terrace. He laughed, the sound startlingly genuine. Touché. He moved to stand beside me at the balustrade, his shoulder nearly touching mine as we gazed out over the grounds. My father likes you, Isabella mentioned. Apparently, I passed some test by merit of being questioned. My father doesn't waste words on people he considers inconsequential, Antonio confirmed. His interest is a compliment and an evaluation, I added perceptively. Antonio's eyes, amber and warm in the soft lighting, studied my face. You see clearly, Sophia. It's refreshing. Your cousin Elisa sees clearly too, I remarked. She was quite informative about my position here. His expression hardened. Elisa oversteps. What exactly did she say to you? I hesitated, suddenly uncertain whether repeating her insinuations would create more problems than it solved. Just that I should remember my place, that I'm a novelty that will wear thin. Antonio's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing beneath the skin. Elisa has always been territorial about family matters. Her opinion is irrelevant. Is it? I challenged softly, because from where I stand, her assessment seems accurate. I don't belong in this world, Antonio. We both know it. He turned fully toward me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the subtle cologne that had become distractingly familiar. And yet, here you are, by my invitation, in my home. The possessive undercurrent in his words sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. As Isabella's caretaker, I reminded him, as much for myself as for him. Is that all you are, Sophia? He asked, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to vibrate through me. We both know it's become more than that. My heart hammered against my ribs. What exactly are you saying? Instead of answering, he reached up, fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with deliberate gentleness. The simple touch felt more intimate than it had any right to be, his calloused fingertips grazing my cheek before withdrawing. I didn't intend this, he said quietly. When I brought you here, it was for Isabella. But you've become... He paused, searching for the right word. Essential. The admission hung in the air between us, fraught with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Before I could respond, the terrace door opened, spilling light and music into our private moment. Ah, there you are, called the elder Castellano's voice. Antonio, the Moretti delegation has arrived. They're asking for you. Antonio's expression shifted, the vulnerability vanishing behind the mask of control I'd come to recognize. He straightened, adjusting his cuffs with precise movements. Business, he said to me, regret coloring his tone. We'll continue this conversation later. As he moved to leave, I caught his arm. Antonio, whatever this is, whatever you think is happening between us, it's complicated. There are boundaries we shouldn't cross. His eyes held mine, something fierce and determined in their depths. Some boundaries exist to be challenged, Sophia. We'll talk soon. The remainder of the evening passed in a haze of contradictory emotions, desire warring with common sense, attraction battling with self-preservation. I circulated with Isabella, met more family members, even danced with the elder Castellano, who moved with surprising grace for his age. But my awareness remained fixed on Antonio, tracking his movements through the crowd, catching his gaze across the room in moments of electric connection. When the party finally began to wind down near midnight, I found myself exhausted from the constant navigation of social currents I barely understood. Isabella had been whisked upstairs by her aunt. The elder Castellano had retired, and I was preparing to find Marco for the drive home when Antonio appeared at my side. "Stay," he said simply. "It's late. The guest wing is prepared." The invitation, innocent on its surface, carried undercurrents that made my pulse quicken. I should get back to my apartment. I have early classes tomorrow. It's after midnight, Sophia. The city isn't safe at this hour. His concern seemed genuine, but beneath it lay something more possessive, more insistent. "I prefer you remain here tonight." I hesitated, torn between practicality and the dangerous awareness that accepting would shift something fundamental between us. "Antonio, please," he added, the word surprising from a man who seemed accustomed to commands rather than requests. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Just tonight." His hand came to rest at the small of my back as he guided me upstairs, the heat of his palm burning through the thin silk of my dress. We moved in silence through the quieting house, tension coiling between us with each step. When we reached the door of the guest suite, he paused. "If you need anything," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My rooms are at the end of the hall." Our eyes locked, the unspoken invitation hanging in the air between us. For a breathless moment, I thought he might close the distance between us, might finally convert the simmering tension into action. Instead, he stepped back, restraint evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "Good night, Sophia," he said, his accent thickening around my name. "Sleep well." As I closed the door behind me, leaning against it with a shaky exhale, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever line I'd been carefully maintaining between professional and personal, between resistance and surrender, was rapidly dissolving. Joe's warning echoed in my memory. Asterisk, some doors can't be closed again. I was standing on the threshold of one such door, poised to step through into Antonio Castellano's world fully, irrevocably. The most troubling realization was how desperately I wanted to take that step.